So President Trump's inauguration is just around the corner. Many are wondering, will he actually be able to get everything done that he talked about during the presidential election cycle? To help me go through all this, I have Andy Puzder with me. Andy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So just some background for my audience. Andy is a fellow over at the Heritage Foundation and the former CEO of CKE Restaurants. He has decades of business experience and rubs shoulders with some of the biggest people in Washington, D.C. Andy, you've been the CEO of a major company. Many liked and still like the fact that President Trump is a businessman, seems to run the country like a businessman. He's surrounding himself with brilliant, common sense people like Peter Navarro, Stephen Moore, Steve Bannon, Elon Musk. What areas of the economy do you believe Donald Trump will actually be able to make great again?
Well, I think he'll make the economy overall great again. I think over a period of time, we'll see inflation come down. We'll see wage growth exceeding the rate of inflation. We'll see GDP increasing. He's got, in addition to the people you mentioned, he's got Scott Bessent as Secretary of Treasury nominee. And, Scott gave the Senate a lecture on economics the other day. He made the comment that we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. Minimum wage should be based on region of the country, not federal. I mean, he really he was really unchallengeable in his sense and his logic. And then you've got Kevin Hassett at the National Economic Council, and Kevin is just a brilliant economic mind. So I think we're going to see real progress on the economic issues during President Trump's team. He also understands the economy from a very practical, business-oriented point of view, and he's got a great team. So I'm expecting great things on the economy.
Yes, I remember Kevin from the first term. Very, very brilliant. I'm excited about the Treasury pick. I don't know if you saw this or not. It was very viral for a while there on X, but I believe his name was Jared Bernstein, and he's one of the top economic advisors for Biden and the White House. And they asked him to explain monetary theory and bonds and will America go bankrupt? And he's like, well, we can't go bankrupt. We print our own money. And then he could not explain instruments. I mean, is this just indicative of the people that Biden surrounded himself with?
Well, he was particularly bad. When you mention instruments, you might have mentioned that he, in fact, I think was a music or a sociology major in college, not an economy, certainly didn't have a doctorate in economics or the kind of business experience that you would expect. And if you can't explain how we sell our bonds and how that funds our debt and the importance of people being willing to buy our bonds every time we go out to market them, if you can't explain that, you really shouldn't be advising anybody on anything that has to do with our economy, particularly at a time when we're talking about, 36 trillion in debt and a deficit that's approaching $2 trillion. We're actually, through the first 3 months of this fiscal year ends September 30th. So October, November, December, we're like 700 billion or something in worse shape deficit-wise than we were last year. I mean, so the number that we're heading for is a tremendously bad number. And so Trump's being left with this dumpster fire economy with all the debt and deficit spending. People say, well, we had economic growth. Well, God, you spent more money than God. You spent all of this money out there. Didn't you expect, you'd at least get something? But you get a small increase in GDP growth for trillions of dollars spent and increases in our debt. You're going to get something, but is it worth the trade-off? And the answer is it's not worth the trade-off. We're in pretty bad shape right now with respect to our debt and deficit.
Yeah, they've just been pumping money into the economy, which gives the illusion that everything is doing well. But at some point, you got to pay the piper. I don't know if you could speak to this, but I read this morning that just in 2024, the Biden administration, the government, hired hundreds of thousands of new employees, which artificially bumped up the unemployment numbers, the strength or the health of the economy. But aren't Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and Trump, aren't they going to be looking into how do we reduce the federal employee number and make the government more efficient?
I think about a third of the jobs that were created last year were government jobs. And the numbers keep getting revised down. Now, you got to remember with a government job, if you're a taxpayer, you're paying for that job. This isn't like a private sector job that's actually benefiting the economy and creating legitimate GDP growth and the kind of growth that we want to see. It's not people investing money and creating jobs. When the government creates jobs, they're just either borrowing the money or they're spending money that taxpayers pay in. And we've seen a tremendous increase in that respect under Biden. Plus the other jobs that were created, interestingly enough, primarily went to people that were not Native Americans. Native Americans lost jobs. So we're talking about immigrants getting jobs. And they were primarily part-time jobs. We actually have fewer full-time jobs. And we have more people working multiple jobs. So this is the numbers. They rely on these jobs numbers to try and show that Biden had some success in his presidency, but the numbers are fake. They're just bad numbers. And then last year, the Bureau of Labor Statistics did an analysis of 6 months ending in March of 2024 and found that there were 800,000 fewer jobs created than they had reported. And we had the Fed out of New York come out and say that in the second quarter of this year, the job growth was actually negative, even though it had been reported to be positive. So I think that we're going to see a little rearranging of the numbers to get things to where they should be, and then we can see the kind of progress that President Trump will make. But as I said, this is a dumpster fire that he's been left with economically. Lucky he's got good sense himself, and he's got a good team in place.
Yeah. During the presidential campaign, President Biden and President Obama refused to give Trump any credit for his booming economy. In fact, the only hint Obama ever gave was that Trump was only successful because of the groundwork that Obama had laid years before. Is there any truth to that? And are they going to try to take credit for anything good that Trump does in this second thing, saying, oh, it was actually Biden laying the groundwork for his second term?
So the answer to the second question is yes, they are going to try and do that. But let me answer the first question first. You just have to think about it. There's a lot of economic data that flows back and forth, and people don't know who to trust or what to trust. But just think about it logically. President Obama was in office for 8 years. He increased taxes, he increased regulation, and he did not focus on domestic energy production. Trump came in and changed all of that. He 100% changed it. He slashed taxes. He slashed regulations. And he focused on domestic energy production to the point where we became energy independent for the first time in many decades. What Biden is saying is, I'm responsible for the growth during the Trump presidency, even though he deserted every economic policy I had, adopted totally contrary economic policies, had great success, and somehow I get the credit for that. Well, I think if you think about it rationally, it's absurd. They are already trying to position Biden for this. Time magazine came out with, I guess it's a magazine still, I don't even know if they have a magazine, but their website, Time came out and said that Biden is leaving Trump the greatest economy in modern times. And Biden actually repeated that when he was going through one of his press conferences he's been giving since he lost the election and is trying to build up his legacy. He actually repeated that statement. But we know that's not true. What Biden's leaving is the largest debt we've ever had, increased at a greater rate than our debt has ever increased. We're spending money as if we're in a world war. We're spending 121% of GDP. That was the level we spent back in 1943, 1944, when we were still fighting World War II. This is an incredible level of deficit spending. It's destroying the economy. The inflation rate, they say, this is another one that you just have to think about logically. The inflation rate last month was 2.9% on a year-over-year basis. So the consumer price index, the month before that on a year-over-year basis, it was 2.8%. And they're coming out and saying, well, inflation is down. Everybody should be happy inflation is down. Well, a 2.8% increase or a 2.9% increase are an increase. They're not a decrease. Inflation's not down. Inflation continues to go up. It's just going up at a slower rate. It was going up at 9% back, in the middle of 2022. Well, now it's only going up about 3%. But the Fed wants it to be down to 2%. That 1% is huge in an economy of our size, by the way. But inflation keeps going up. So you go to the grocery store and you read the newspaper and you think, well, I'm going to the grocery, eggs must be cheaper, milk must be cheaper because everybody tells me inflation's coming down. And then you go in and it's more expensive. Well, that's because inflation is not going down. It's up about 22% since Biden took office. It was up, the total for Trump's 4 years was about 7%. So we're seeing a huge increase in inflation. And I think there's an effort to mislead people as to the actual economic data that's out there. But people just need to look at this reasonably. If you don't see prices coming down, then inflation's going up, no matter what they tell you.
Okay. Can you pinpoint why things would be up over 22% with Biden, but over Trump's time only 7%? Was that the fact that he hammered Jerome Powell and others to keep interest rates low, that he focused on energy production, which is one of the major drivers of a healthy economy? Why the big difference?
Well, I tell you, and you may recall back for the first 8 quarters of the Trump presidency, the Fed under Yellen and then Powell increased interest rates. Like they increased interest rates once under President Obama. The stock market reacted negatively. It was January of 2016. And because it was an election year, the Fed just backed off. They didn't increase interest rates at all. So for 8 years, they increased interest rate once. After Trump was elected, they increased them eight times in a row, right? 8 quarters in a row. So you had them artificially increasing interest rates, even though there was no inflation to counter. They were increasing interest rates, and inflation was under 2% or was around 2%. So it wasn't the Fed that caused this. What caused the problems under Biden was spending. Coming out of the pandemic, we knew a couple of things. One was we knew that supply chains were in trouble. People hadn't been working, so shipping, we're having problems with shipping, with trains, with trucks. Factories had been shut down or they had reduced production. So we didn't have a lot of goods for people to purchase. We also knew people had a lot of money because people had been given a lot of money during the beginning of the pandemic when we shut the economy down. Every state shut down its economy and we handed out checks to people so that they could survive, which made a lot of sense. So they had savings were at a very high rate, but there really wasn't a lot to spend on. All right, so then we come out with the vaccines in December of right after the election, which was, it couldn't have been a month earlier. They were President Trump's vaccines, but they come up with them after the election. And so people are now, the pandemic's winding down, it's coming to an end. People are going out there ready to spend, but there's too much money. They've already got money in the bank and too few goods. Well, when there's too much money chasing too few goods, as Milton Friedman would say, what happens is the price of the goods go up because there's great demand for the goods. If there's demand for something and it's in short supply, the price of it will increase. So what did Biden do? Did he come in and say, all right, we need to calm things down. We're not going to hand out any more money. We're going to let the supply chains catch up to the demand so that there's enough goods to meet the demand that's out there. No, he actually, in March, he takes office in January 20th. By the beginning of March, they enact the so-called American Rescue Plan, which was just the opposite of a rescue plan, where they handed out $2 trillion to the American public. On top of what they already had, everybody got a check. Well, of course, you can actually see, if you look at the inflation data, you can actually see in March, inflation surges. And it just keeps going up until June. And the Fed refused to recognize, and Janet Yellen at Treasury refused to recognize that what was causing this inflation. They would say, oh, it's just transitory. It'll go away when supply chains catch up. But in the meantime, you've got, not only did they pass the American Rescue Plan, they then passed the absolutely ridiculous, worst named bill in the history of bad named bills in America, the Inflation Reduction Act, which again poured more money into the economy, which of course made inflation even worse. So the problem was spending. The problem was spending that drove inflation. It's spending that drove up the deficit, and it's continued spending that's driving up our deficit and putting us in real trouble.
Do you think the economists surrounding Biden were like, this bill actually will reduce inflation? Or do you think the marketing people around Biden said, this will sound really good and we'll be able to get it passed in Congress?
Actually, I think it was both. And the interesting thing is, economists who normally are supportive of Democrats and supportive of spending, I'll mention two. One is was the president of Harvard, was the Secretary of Treasury under President Clinton. Clinton, and then was the president of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Obama, a very famous economist named Larry Summers. Larry Summers is the Democrats' economist emeritus. He wrote an article in the Washington Post in February of 2020 when they were considering this American Rescue Plan. And the article basically said, don't do this. If you do this, we'll experience, and I think this is a direct quote, inflation we haven't seen in a generation. Jason Furman, another Obama economist, came out and said, don't do this. This will cause inflation. And so maybe it was the economists in the White House who were not terrifically good. And certainly the people that are the PR people in the White House were saying, we'll call this the American Rescue Plan. We'll call this the Inflation Reduction Act, even though the economists that we rely on and trust are telling us it's going to do just the opposite. But they went ahead and did it anyway. And quite honestly, they paid the price. They Kamala Harris, because she couldn't walk away from Biden's economic policies, really lost an election in a big way. Just a few months ago, we were talking about how many swing states will Trump carry? Well, he's not going to win the popular vote. We know that. But how many electoral votes? He got it all. He won the popular vote. He won every swing state. He got the Senate. He got the House. He kept the House. So they paid the price for this. And even James Carville came out with an article recently saying that it was the economy stupid. Now, I had an article on Fox News about a month before that said it was the economy stupid, agreeing with him. But it clearly was an economy election, and the Democrats' policies were not in Americans' best interest, and Americans knew it.
Okay. I had the opportunity of speaking with the speechwriter for Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, and he told me how behind the scenes, Richard Nixon was privately advising Ronald Reagan, and he kept telling Reagan over and over again, always make it about the people, always make it about the economy. People know if their wallet is hurting. They don't like, and that's where I think the Democrats went wrong, is they kept telling everybody, your life is better because of us. But then they would sit down at the kitchen table and go, why is everything so expensive? And I just think that things were not adding up in people's minds. And you could polish, Kamala Harris with $2 billion. It didn't change the fact that Americans were feeling it in their wallet.
Yeah, you really can't fool people very much on the economic issues. I think the Democrats had a very difficult time coming to grips with this. I think they were out saying to themselves, look, we handed out literally trillions of dollars. How could these people not be voting for us? We did what we always do. We bought the votes. The money's out there. We spent the money. You've got the money in your pockets. Now you need to vote for us. The American people said, we're not falling for this again. We fell for it before, and it sounds great, but apparently you have to pay the piper at some point, and we're paying it every time we go to the gas station, every time we go to the grocery store, when we try and buy insurance, when we try and buy a house, and we just don't believe you. And I think the big change they talk about this being a transition election, and I think the big change was the Democrats no longer trust, or the American people no longer trust the Democrats with their economic future. They now trust the Trump Republicans. And that's a trust that Republicans can't lose. That's a trust that we have to live up to during this next 4 years. And I think we have the team in place to do that. But I think that was the shift in the election. You really saw every group, even where Trump didn't win the election, like New York and California, you saw a massive switch of votes from people that traditionally never voted for him to vote. You're starting to see that movement, even among people that were traditionally supporting Democrats. And I think you'll see more of that as President Trump and his economic team produce the results that I'm confident they'll produce.
Yeah, I think they will too. So I started picking up on this as a journalist from the weirdest place. It was actually Don Lemon, who used to be on CNN. I'm not a big fan of Don Lemon personally, but I like to watch the other side to see what they're saying. And he put out a video, and I was like, "Oh, wait a minute! I think that this is actually more telling." He went to New Jersey, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, a lot of those Great Lakes, East Coast areas, and he spoke with hundreds of Americans. And his analysis was, nobody knows who Kamala Harris is or what she stands for, and they all felt they did better economically under Trump. And when he said those two things, I was like, oh, she's going to lose. I don't care how much money they throw at her. She's going to lose, because if they don't know, if they can't see the future with your presidency, and the old president, they felt like they had way more money, like it's a no-brainer on how they're going to vote.
And they did have more money. I mean, the family income hit historic highs under Trump. The unemployment rate for every race, every demographic group, men, women, young people, old people, the unemployment rate hit historic lows. Wage growth hit historic highs. Job openings hit historic highs. The income inequality declined, and the poverty rate hit the lowest rate it hit since they'd been recording the poverty rate. So obviously people felt good about this. There was more money. There were fewer poor people. Everybody had a job. And then COVID hit. And they blamed COVID on Trump in 2020. It's one of the reasons he didn't win the election. I don't think it was fair that they blamed him. I think there was only one solution to COVID, and that was a vaccine. Nothing else that we did was really going to slow it. And he eventually found a vaccine. Now, there may be questions about the effectiveness of that vaccine since it came out, but at least it was the right direction. He shouldn't have been punished for it. And more people died from COVID under Biden than they did under Trump, despite all the praise he gets for how he handled COVID. But he lost because of COVID. And when COVID went away and people looked in their pockets and the money was gone, they couldn't afford to get things for their kids. They couldn't afford to get homes. They couldn't afford to buy cars. They said, hey, I remember when it was better. I remember the good old days, and they were just a couple years ago. So let's reelect that guy. And I think that's what happened.
Yeah, I kept telling my community here online, the nostalgia of the Trump era will overpower the current situation. That longing for $1.89 gas, affordable egg, like just that, like being able to buy a house. And, like, I'm grateful the price of my house went up, but now I'm like, okay, how are my 3 children ever going to be able to buy a house? Now I have to worry as a father. You've got a book, A Tyranny for the Good of Its Victims. That's a very interesting title. Tell me about the book.
So A Tyranny for the Good of Its Victims is a phrase that I took from C.S. Lewis, who was saying that he thought a tyranny where people thought they were protecting you, right? They thought we're the wise people. We're going to protect the poor people. If the tyrants are acting because they think they're good people, they think they're protecting your interests, they never give up. If they're acting for their own interests, at some point they might give up. Like he used robber barons as an example. He said at least that if a tyrant is a robber baron, they might take a rest. They might take a day off. They might give up. But if people are acting because they believe they're acting in your interest, they never give up. And the subtitle of that is, it's a tyranny for the good of its victims, the ugly truth about stakeholder capitalism. And the ugly truth about stakeholder capitalism is that it isn't capitalism at all. In fact, it's an effort to destroy free market capitalism. It's socialism in sheep's clothing. It's an effort it's a collectivist ideology designed to empower a group of financial elites to impose their social and political beliefs on us, all in the name of protecting us, because they don't trust us, right? To make these decisions for ourselves, our nation, or our planet. It's a rejection of not only free market capitalism, it's a rejection of democracy, because democracy and free market capitalism really empower us They empower we, the people, to make these kinds of decisions for ourselves. Now, people may say, well, Andy, aren't you exaggerating a bit? And I'm not. All you got to do is think about it. Think about how many times in the past year or two you've thought, why are big businesses doing what they're doing? Why are they making these ridiculous decisions? Why would Disney and Target, family-friendly brands, and Anheuser-Busch, which is selling beer, to guys, why would they adopt or advocate for a transgender agenda? Or even worse, you've got ExxonMobil and Chevron. Why would they adopt net zero carbon emission goals when the product they depend on for their survival is gas and oil? Well, the reason is because there really is a group out there, a small group of financial elites. They run the largest asset management firms in the world, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, who are forcing a leftist, woke, radical cultural agenda on American businesses and by extension on all of us. So this is why I wrote the book, to get the word out there that these people are doing it. They're taking your rights away when they do it, and they're implementing an agenda that you haven't voted for and you aren't supporting with free market purchases. It's their cultural agenda, and they're using the money that you invest with them. This is the money they get from retirement systems of working and middle class families, and 401k plans and other type of retirement vehicles. They're using our money to impose their values on us, which we may well not agree with, and which should be subject to our democratic process and our free market economy.
Yeah. Do you see a big shift happening, though? Because I feel like in the last 30, 60, 90 days, I'm seeing Coca-Cola, Walmart, Target, Harley Davidson, others that are like, well, maybe we shouldn't be pushing DEI as much, or maybe we should back off the LGBTQ 2SA plus agenda and maybe just focus on making the company better. Do you think some of that comes from social pressure, as in it getting out into the light that Coca-Cola went through all of this anti-white people training, that Budweiser made people that drive trucks and work on cars feel like they're bad if they don't accept a transgender person? What are your thoughts? Is some of that unwinding?
Yeah, well, about 2 years ago, people started to realize there's a group, I call them the resistance in the book. There's a group of us, a group of individuals and entities that saw what was going on with stakeholder capitalism, which is really the economic system, and what they push is environmental, social, and governance, ESG investing, and DEI. DEI is really the S in ESG. And some of us saw what was going on. We came out, we resisted this. At first, you'd say ESG, and I'd be speaking to a crowd, and everybody's eyes would glaze over. Nobody wanted to hear about ESG or DEI. But over a period, over the last couple of years, people have come to realize what it is. It's really gotten exposed. Now, the left will say, well, we're walking away from ESG because it became politicized. But that's not why they're walking away from it. They're walking away from it because people figured out what it actually meant and what it meant for their lives and the American economy. So there is this group. Plus, we've had, as a part of that, we've had President Trump win the election. And I think corporations are saying, look, we're starting to get resistance to this. President Trump's going to be resistant to us. We need to at least withdraw from these climate groups. We need to pull back on these DEI policies, so we're not out there so much. What happened in the interim was a number of states passed laws, fiduciary duty laws, that said you can't invest for political purposes. You can only invest to generate returns for your investors, which, by the way, is why you hire an asset manager. You want returns, right? So state laws were passed. Lawsuits were filed based on fiduciary violations. 11 states filed an antitrust case claiming that BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard had actually colluded to get these climate goals as part of the American economy. The House Judiciary Committee came out with a report about a month ago that said there was this large collusion across these financial institutions. And then all of a sudden, you saw the financial institutions withdrawing from the groups that they were alleged to have colluded with. So the question is, has there been a change in what they're doing, or just a change, just a pullback from the very public notion of it? My suspicion is it's a pullback from the public notion of it. These people are collectivists. They believe they're acting in our best interest. Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock, has come out and said democracy is failing. Democracy is wrenching political dysfunction. It's really not a system that governs very well. They really think they can run our lives better than we can run our lives. So I'm going to be very surprised if they back off. Now, the way we can determine if they're backing off or not, there's really two ways. One is BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard issue proxy voting guidance every spring. They say, here's how we're going to vote shares. Early in the year, they announced that. If they back off these climate goals in the proxy statement, and not just the fancy language that the lawyers add about fiduciariness and all these other things, but actually back off those goals, then that would be some progress. If they back off encouraging this diversity, equity, and inclusion in hiring practices and board composition, then that would be progress. The other thing we need to watch for is we need to see how American corporations are compensating their management teams. If the compensation includes benefits for meeting these net zero goals, which will destroy our economy like they're destroying Europe's, if they remove those goals and remove these DEI hiring goals, then I'd say we're making some progress. Now, I will say there are, the countries that have been most aggressive on this DEI initiative and on the net carbon emission goals initiatives, like the UK and like Canada, are suffering dire economic consequences. Europe is as well, Germany in particular. But I don't know if you know this, but the UK GDP per capita, that's economic growth per person, right, in Canada and the UK is lower than GDP per capita in Mississippi. And Mississippi has the lowest GDP per capita in the United States of all 50 states. It's the lowest. UK and Canada, they're below that. So these policies have real impacts on people's lives. So I'm hoping we'll see significant change. I'll be surprised if there's significant change. I think there will be a lot of withdrawing from the very obvious organizations that advocate for these policies. I think you'll see a lot of companies backing off of DEI. I hope they back off of it in reality as opposed to just in name. Robbie Starbuck's been doing a great job on this.
Yes.
Did it very smart, did it online, so he didn't have to depend on any of the traditional media people. And he started with a tractor company. He didn't start with Starbucks. He didn't start with Ben and Jerry's. He started with a tractor company, and he's had increasing success. So I think we're seeing. I like to quote Winston Churchill, who after the British won a battle against Germany in World War II, they won a significant battle, and he went on radio and said, "This is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." And so I think we're here at the end of the beginning. We've had some victories, but we have not won this war, and we need to stay diligent. That's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book to explain this, to get out in front of people so they could understand it, and realize that this is a real threat to who we are. It's a threat to our founding principles. Just think of it like this. It's a threat to our democracy because they use their share voting power as a shortcut around the ballot box, right, to initiate these, to enforce these social and political policies on us that we haven't voted for. It's a threat to our free market economy because they force the CEOs of the companies in which they're the major shareholders, and they're the major shareholders in most American companies. They force those CEOs to put these political objectives above their obligation to generate returns for the investors. And it's an attack on our liberty because they use our money to do it. So this is a real attack on our founding principles, and we need to, and I wrote the book to make that as obvious as I could.
Awesome. That sounds incredible. Well, I'm very optimistic for the second term of the Trump administration.
Me too.
I think he's learned a lot of lessons. I think the American people have woken up to some of the troubles that face us. But overall, I feel like there's really good energy. I'm grateful that there's great people like you that are going to bring real common sense wisdom back to helping the American people. And I'm grateful that C.S. Lewis played a part in your book, because he's one of my favorite all-time authors. Andy, thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to put a direct link to your book down below, A Tyranny for the Good of Its Victims, on Amazon. And if people want to follow you online, where's the best place for me to push them?
It would be Twitter. It would be, X. It would be X at Andy Puzder, ANDYPUZDER. Make sure the Z goes first. People mix the Z and the D up all the time for some reason. But at Andy Puzder, and that's where I do most of the things I post.
Okay. I will put direct links so that people can find you. If you get a chance to talk to Elon Musk, maybe tell him, switch it back to Twitter. It's just so much easier to say. Hey, this has been a great conversation.
One of the things I will not do is give advice to Elon Musk. This guy's running 6 companies that are changing the world, and I'd rather listen to him than tell him tell him what he should be doing.
Oh yes. Well, thank you again for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here. Hope we do it again.